Great, thank you again. My name is Octavio Hinojosa, and I'm the president of the Lideres Hispanos Association. We are a nonprofit association, a members-only organization composed of 225 Americans of Hispanic heritage who have had the privilege of participating in a prestigious leadership program, which has identified Americans of Hispanic heritage from all walks of life and also from distinct professional backgrounds. And each of us have had the unique opportunity of participating in a intensive leadership program that's been sponsored by Spanish foundations. And we've had the opportunity of sharing our heritage and our experiences as leaders in the US. And today, we are delighted to co-host this important and urgent webinar to bring to your attention an important clinical trial that is currently taking place. And we ask that you spread the word, that you pass the word about this potential treatment for individuals who are currently or hospitalized with COVID-19. As you can appreciate, we're all living in a very difficult moment in our lives, not just here domestically, but certainly internationally. And just today, unfortunately, we've learned that 1 in 930 Americans have unfortunately passed away due to COVID. And there are now over 128,210 patients that are currently hospitalized with this virus, which has increased up 25% over the past month. This webinar is specifically intended to connect with Latino community leaders like yourselves to discuss the passive immunity trial for our nation, i.e. Pass It On. This clinical trial uses convalescent plasma from recovered COVID-19 patients as a possible treatment for hospitalized COVID-19 patients. And with your help, we'd like to spread the word about this opportunity so we can ensure that many of our loved ones do receive adequate treatment. To help us with today's webinar, I'm delighted to introduce a great friend of mine who I've had the opportunity of working throughout the nation and on numerous occasions. Her name is Marcela Gomez, and she is here today. She's a former president chair of the Tennessee Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, and I'm just absolutely delighted for this opportunity to partner with Marcela and with our friends at Vanderbilt Medical University Center. So please go ahead and take the baton, if you will, Marcela, and thank you for your leadership.
Absolutely. Thank you, Octavio. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. As Octavio said, I have worked with him in several occasions before. I was the former president of the Tennessee Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, but I am a founding partner of a Culture Shift team. We are an agency based in Nashville, Tennessee, with offices around the United States. And we specialize in diversity, inclusion, and equity, both internally for companies that want to grow their employment engagement or recruitment, but also in marketing, advertising, and public relations. Our team started working in mid-August on the Pass It On trial with Vanderbilt University Medical Center, which is the institution that leads the study. And joining us today from VUMC are Terry Edwards, who is the Director of Research Support Services, Sarah Cook, Research Services Consultant, and Jasmine Bell, Dissemination Manager. And they both work for the Vanderbilt Institute for Clinical and Translational Research. When we were approached by Terry and her team to work on a communication and public relations strategy, one of the main directives was to make sure that it was inclusive and culturally relevant in the outreach to a multicultural nation. This is the type of work that Culture Shift team has been doing for about 25 years. In doing this work, we recognize that minorities have not always been approached to participate in clinical trials or have not had a good experience in the past. As we now embark in community outreach for the Pass It On trial, we ask that you as community leaders will help us create a new relationship between our communities and clinical trial researchers and scientists. Today, the webinar called How Latino Leaders Can Help Fight COVID-19, Pass It On clinical trial will be presented by Dr. Todd Rice. Dr. Todd Rice is a co-principal investigator with Dr. Wesley Self for the Pass It On study. Dr. Rice is the Vice President for Clinical Trial Innovation and Operations in the Vanderbilt Institute for Clinical and Translational Research and directs the Medical Intensive Care Unit. He also leads Vanderbilt University Medical Center's Medical Intensive Care Unit strategy for the care of COVID-19 patients. He has a wealth of experience in multi-site clinical trial networks, as well as conducting large, pragmatic, comparative effectiveness trials. His training and experience as a physician scientist focusing on improving the treatment of patients and infectious diseases and critical illness in the ICU are incredibly valuable in leading the Pass It On study. Dr. Rice will share with us the Pass It On trial, and after his presentation, Jasmine Bell, Dissemination Manager at Vanderbilt Institute for Clinical and Translational Research, will talk to us briefly about recruitment for the trial. Dr. Rice, the virtual stage is all yours. Thank you.
Thanks, Marcella. And thank you, Octavio, for your great lead into this also. So as Marcella said, I'm one of the principal investigators for this trial. And in the next probably 10 or 15 minutes, I'm going to walk you through just the background of the trial and why we think it's really important to reach out to minorities, and especially minorities of Hispanic descent or Latino descent for this trial, and why we've made this a priority of ours. So the trial is called the Passive Immunity Trial for Our Nation. Short is, it's called Pass It On. And the idea is to try and get antibodies for everybody. So I think Sarah is doing my slides. So thank you, Sarah. Next slide. First, why is it important that we have equitable research and that we enroll minorities in this trial? Well, as many of you know, or if you don't, you're going to find out here, COVID-19 disproportionately affects minorities. There are a number of potential reasons for this. We don't know that we have it all figured out, but there's a number of potential reasons for this. And you can see in this table, there are a number of minority populations that are listed: American Indian, Alaska Native, Asian, Black or African American, and then the far right column with the red box is Hispanic or Latino persons. And you can see the cases are exaggerated in the Hispanic or Latino persons. In general, per standardized population number, there are 1.7 times as many cases in the Hispanic or Latino persons. There are 4 times as many hospitalizations and 2.8 times as many deaths. So the Hispanic and Latino population is more likely to get COVID, and if they do get COVID, they're more likely to have severe COVID and have adverse outcomes from COVID. And for us to understand treatments and effective treatments for this viral infection, we need to have representation of the people that are being affected by this, and especially people who are being disproportionately affected, as we've shown here in this slide, the Hispanic and Latino population is. Next slide, thanks. How do we do this? Well, we need participation in trials, and we need participation in therapeutic trials to understand whether the therapeutic effect of different therapies is different in different populations, or is it the same in different populations, and to have generalizable treatments that we can say this isn't a treatment that's effective for this disease. In order to get that participation, we recognize there are multiple steps. The big ultimate thing is we have to build trust in medical research. And it's been a long, arduous process to build trust due to many issues in the past. And so part of that is trying to reach out, explain the trial to everybody, and especially to the minority populations that we're trying to reach out to, and just kind of get buy-in and answer questions, etc. How do we do that? So we acknowledge and address that there is medical mistrust from minorities to medical research. That is based in some actions in the past and some mistreatment of minorities in the past. And the recognition of that is the first step to trying to rebuild this trust. We need to recruit and retain culturally sensitive, tailored, and inclusive populations. And that's part of what we're trying to do here. We also understand that decision-making in the study should be a collaboration and should be informed by community members. So we, in a number of different formats, have reached out to different populations: the African-American population, the elderly population, the Latino or Latinx population, as we've been planning, conducting, and revising the trial to get feedback and collaboration on kind of how we're conducting the trial. And then the last thing is that it's important for us to return the findings back to the participants. and that includes the minority participants, and let you know what we found, whether the treatment was effective, whether it was effective specifically in the minority populations, and the next steps after finishing this trial, what those steps are moving forward. Next slide. So let me go into some details about the actual trial. So the trial is called Pass It On, which comes from passive immunity therapy of our nation. And it deals with convalescent plasma. So I suspect that many of you have heard convalescent plasma. It's in the media, people talk about it, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's been explained and that you truly understand it. So this slide, I'm going to try and explain what convalescent plasma is. So plasma is the liquid part of blood. So there's some cells that carry oxygen, and then there's a liquid part of blood that carries a bunch of different clotting factors and antibodies and a lot of different things in that liquid part of the blood. Convalescent plasma is that liquid part of the blood that's collected from people who have recovered from COVID-19. So they've had the disease, all the ones in our study have been sick from the disease, they've tested positive for the disease, and now they've recovered, usually at least 28 days after their disease onset. And we collect their plasma from them. And what we're trying to get with this plasma is we're trying to collect the antibodies that the recovered patients have made to the virus. We know that when patients recover, part of the immune process that gets them over and helps them recover from the disease is making antibodies specific to that virus. Those antibodies then circulate and they're in the plasma in the patient's body for a period of time. And what we're trying to do is we're collecting that plasma to essentially get those antibodies against that virus in that plasma. Antibodies are proteins that they help fight infection. They essentially block the virus from doing its thing, entering cells, reproducing, those sorts of things. The antibodies block the virus from doing that. We recognize that enrollment of racial and ethnic minorities in this study is going to be the only way we'll be able to determine if convalescent plasma therapy is successful in treating patients that have COVID-19, and specifically patients of all racial populations, because all racial populations are affected, many of them, like the Latino or Hispanic population, more affected than other racial populations. So here you can see in the picture some cartoon-like figures. There's a donor arm, you get blood, you separate that blood into the plasma, which is kind of the golden liquid, as many have referred it to, part of the blood, and the cells, which carry the oxygen. We take that liquid part, that plasma, and we infuse that into a patient. Here you can see into the patient with the disease early in the course to try and give them somebody else's antibodies to protect them against the virus. That's convalescent plasma. So who are we enrolling in this trial and how are we doing this trial? So in order to be eligible for the trial, you have to be hospitalized with COVID-19. So if you have COVID-19, but you're not sick enough to need the hospital, then you're not eligible for our study. Just so you know, there are a couple other groups that are doing studies in people who are not sick enough to need the hospital to see if convalescent plasma in those patients helps them not need the hospital and helps them get over the virus faster. Our study is looking specifically at patients that are in the hospital with their COVID-19. They get randomized to either a dose of convalescent plasma or placebo. Placebo is a harmless solution that's a crystalloid solution, an IV solution that's often given to patients, and it has added multivitamins in it that makes it the same color as convalescent plasma, so that patients may not know which of these two treatment arms they're getting. While patients are in the hospital, they're monitored, and if they leave the hospital before day 15 or 29, then we call them to get follow-up. So you can see kind of on the bottom, here's the study timeline. A patient gets hospitalized, they get approached to whether or not they'd like to participate in the study. They give consent and say, yes, I'd like to participate. They're enrolled in the study. They're randomly assigned to either convalescent plasma, 1 unit, 1 dose, 1 bag of convalescent plasma, or the lactated ringers with vitamins. And then we monitor the patient while they're in the hospital. We monitor things like your lab values, your vital signs, how much oxygen you're needing, how well you're doing. And then we do follow-up at day 15 and day 29. And if the patient has left the hospital by then, we call them to get that follow-up. If they're in the hospital, we can obviously get the follow-up more easily because they're already still in the hospital. But many patients go home by day 15 or day 29, and if they do, we call to see how they are doing. Next slide, Sarah. Requirements for participation. So we're looking for patients that are 18 years or older, so they have to be adults, currently hospitalized, or they're in an emergency department with a order to be hospitalized. They're about ready to be hospitalized. You have to have respiratory symptoms of acute infection defined as either cough, chills or fever, or shortness of breath. And then you have to have laboratory confirmed COVID-19 infection within the past 2 weeks. And the reason it's within the past 2 weeks is because we know that patients over the course of about 2 weeks will develop their own antibodies. And we don't think it's beneficial to a patient to give them somebody else's antibodies if the patient has already developed their own antibodies. So we're trying to get them early when giving them somebody else's antibodies will give them antibodies that they don't already have and help them kind of fight the virus. Who are we not allowed to enroll, or who are we looking to not put in the trial? Prisoners, patients that are outside their 14 days after symptoms time window. That's because we think they already have antibodies and we can't help them by giving them other people's antibodies. Not committed to full support means that you aren't going to be aggressive with your care, and you kind of are restricted in the treatments that you would get. Unable to be contacted for follow-up at the end of the study. If you'd already gotten plasma or have a history of reactions to blood products. If you're well enough that you're going to leave the hospital within 24 hours of when we would enroll you, we like to monitor for you for at least 6 hours after you get the infusion, and not have you leave the hospital within a day of getting the infusion. If you were previously in this trial, or if you're in another trial that might give you antibodies, like a monoclonal antibody trial or another passive immunity therapy. Next slide, Sarah. Benefits and risks. So there are potential benefits. If convalescent plasma helps patients fight COVID-19, then patients that are in the trial and get that arm may actually have better survival, faster recovery time, decreased need for high intensive care resources like the ICU or high level oxygen therapy. Regardless, there are definitely benefits to science and humankind, and that is understanding if this convalescent plasma is a treatment that we should be giving patients that have COVID-19 and whether or not it helps patients with COVID-19. A lot of the process of getting convalescent plasma is a number of steps, and there's a lot of intricate steps involved, and it's going to be beneficial for us to know if it's helpful for patients and worth going through those steps, or if it's not that helpful for patients and we should focus our energy someplace else. There could be risks. Most of these are mild reactions to a blood transfusion or a plasma transfusion, things like fever, rash, hives, or a headache. Some of these, fever and headache, patients may already have with COVID, but we may actually see these in response to getting plasma also. Next slide, Sarah. What about compensation and cost of participating? There's no cost to participate. The participants or their insurance don't have to pay for any tests or treatments that are being done only for research. Participants are responsible for paying for the regular care that they get for their illness and for their COVID. And that may be that insurance pays for it, but ultimately the participant or their insurance is responsible for paying for the regular care for the treatment of their COVID. They would not get charged, neither the study participant or the insurance will get charged for things being done only for research. So administration of the plasma. There's a blood draw specifically to check for antibodies, and that all would be done without charge to the participants or their insurance. There is some compensation. Participants are compensated for follow-ups that take place on day 15 and day 29 after treatment. And the compensation is a check for $25 for each of those 2 follow-ups. So if you do both of them, you could get $50 for kind of completing the study. Next slide, Sarah. Confidentiality. This is big. This is big in medical records, and it's big in research records. So protecting participant identity and health information is the utmost importance, both in clinical care of patients and in research. And because of that, the data go into a database that only the research team has access to. So it's a private, confidential database that only the research team has access to. The patient's information is protected under a federal issued certificate of confidentiality, and it means that essentially the data are protected against things like legal requests for them. So if somebody goes to court and says, we want all of the data, those data are protected under the certificate of confidentiality from being released to anybody who's trying to get them through the courts. What do we know so far? So our goal is to determine if these antibodies in the convalescent plasma are safe and effective in treating COVID-19 patients that are in the hospital. The goal is to enroll 1,000 participants, and we're trying to do that at up to 50 US sites. We currently have about 20 US sites that are enrolling across the country. And the enrollment right now is right at about half of the 1,000 patients. So we're just at about 500. That 495 is from early this morning. There have been some participants enrolled today, so we're probably right at about 500. You can see kind of on the right-hand side what is the distribution and the populations of participants that have been enrolled in those 500 patients. And you can see the majority, as it is in almost all studies, are non-Hispanic whites. But in this trial, 14% of the patients are Hispanic or Latino. And that's higher than we see in most of our trials that we do. And that's for a couple of reasons. One is because I think we've done outreach like this, which has helped enrollment. And secondly, as I showed you at the very beginning, it's because there's a higher proportion of Hispanic or Latino patients that are getting COVID-19 and are getting COVID-19 in a severe enough form of it to need to be in the hospital. And so there's a higher proportion of those patients that are in the hospital that are actually eligible for the trial than the other populations on this slide. I think Jasmine is going to talk about recruitment and retention. So I'm going to pass it over to Jasmine.
Yes, and thank you, Dr. Rice, and thanks for everybody for joining this call today, and good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are. My name is Jasmine, and I'm one of the many people involved in supporting a lot of the recruitment efforts on this project to raise national awareness about the study. And many of those individuals are joined with me today on this call, and you all will have the opportunity to hear from those individuals during our Q&A portion of today's presentation. Just to give everybody a heads up, for the purposes of today's presentation, I will need to be turning off my camera while I present. Next slide, please. So a huge emphasis for our study was to really ensure that our priority populations were able to see themselves reflected within the study. And we also wanted to ensure that input from the community was really driving a lot of our recruitment efforts. Dr. Rice kind of touched on this earlier, but to begin our efforts, we held 3 separate community engagement studios amongst Latinos, Black Americans, and older adults. And they provided a significant amount of input and guidance on recruitment materials and what we should develop and how we should be framing our study to the general public. And as a result, we developed a significant amount of recruitment materials. So to begin, on our study website, we have an extensive number of videos explaining the subject, a study in the form of a abbreviated consent information. And the speakers in these videos vary across racial demographics and language, and these videos are available in English, Spanish, Arabic, and Chinese. The website also features videos of previous participants in the study, and it shares their experience with participating in the trial. And these participants also shared their stories in English, Spanish, as well as Chinese. And in general, the study website is multilingual, like the resources that I mentioned previously. We also have social media accounts on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. And the study has done a significant amount of community outreach to over 600 organizations and will be holding virtual town halls similar to this nationally to continue to spread awareness about the study and to foster collaborative relationships. Lastly, we have a significant amount of multilingual print materials in the form of one pagers, flyers, posters, fact sheets, and public transportation advertising. Next. So for the purposes of today's presentation, we have some materials and visual examples of recruitment materials that were developed in Spanish. And our aims when developing these materials was just to really ensure that our priority populations were able to really resonate with these materials and see themselves reflected throughout the study process. So the top image on this screen is a screenshot of the Pass It On Study website homepage. And you'll see that this website is available in Spanish in addition to English, Arabic, and Chinese. The bottom images here is a screenshot of the videos that I mentioned earlier that are available in Spanish on the website. And these videos are an easy to understand overview and introduction to the study. And it also explains the plasma infusion process, transfusion process. And it should be noted that all of the clinicians that are in these videos are employees of Vanderbilt. And these videos are available to anyone who visits our study website. And if you actually look in the middle panel there, you can see that users have the opportunity to kind of toggle between languages depending on their preference. The Pass It On Study website also has videos from people who have participated in the trial and they've had the opportunity to share their experience. So you can see that in the upper right hand corner. And the website also has a frequently asked questions page, and this really aims to answer some of the questions that we anticipate that participants and families will have about the study. And this, again, like all of our other materials, are available in Spanish in addition to English, Spanish, Arabic, and Chinese. The recruitment flyers and posters were developed for study teams to use and display physically at different study sites across the country. And these materials are really meant to kind of raise awareness among patients and their families about the trial. The flyer and poster also links back to the Spanish study website, and this provides additional information about the study. And you can see that this can easily be accessible through scanning the QR code in the bottom right-hand corner with a smartphone camera. And information about the study is also available on public transportation. And you can see this on buses, bus shelters, and bus benches around Nashville and the greater Nashville area. And you can see similarly to the flyer and poster that there is a QR code that links back to the study website, as well as some of our social media pages. And here are just a few more examples of study materials that we've created. So on the left here, we have a study fact sheet, and this is available to download from the study website, and it provides a high-level overview of the study, including the study design, who can participate, and where someone can participate if they'd like to. And on the right-hand side, you can see our study one-pager, which is directed towards community organizations, and it kind of functions as an initial introduction to the study and our mission. You all likely received this material for this presentation today. On the communication of results. So we know that sharing the results back to the community is really important. And we will be partnering with various experts to communicate our findings and summaries. And this information will be available in many places, including our study website, clinicaltrials.gov, and in peer-reviewed journals. So I am going to turn it over to my colleague, Sarah, to begin the Q&A portion of today's meeting.
Great, thanks Jasmine, and thank you Dr. Rice for that presentation. So we have plenty of time today for taking questions. So far I think I've just had one question that has come through the chat box. Again, please feel free to use the chat feature, chat any questions or comments that you have, and we'll just take it from the top. So the first question came from earlier, Pat Martinez. This is directed at Dr. Rice, and they ask, does blood type matter to be a donor?
Blood type matters in the fact that we match blood types. So if you are type A, we give you A plasma, and if you're B, we give you B plasma. But we need all blood types to be donors so that we have plasma with all blood types that we can give to patients of all blood types. And so we're not looking for A donors or B donors. We're looking for all patients who've recovered to be donors. And if you're sick with COVID in the hospital, we then have blood of all types so that it doesn't matter what blood type you have. We can match your blood type and provide you with plasma. But the blood type does matter. We have to match the plasma. So we can't just give any person, anybody else's plasma. We have to make sure it's the same or compatible blood types to give it to them for plasma.
Okay, so the next question is this study available for those who are located in Puerto Rico?
We do not have a Puerto Rico site right now. It's an interesting thought. We can brainstorm a little bit to see if we might be able to reach out to Puerto Rico. It's in the US, so Puerto Rico shouldn't be a big reach for us, but we currently don't have a Puerto Rico site.
Dr. Rice, I do want to mention that all of the locations and sites that are participating and those that are going to enroll later this year are located in the website, the passitonstudy.org website. You can look under study locations, and all the locations are listed there.
Yep.
We have another question that just came through that is asking about, is Social Security or tax ID required to participate?
We went round and round on this, and we have an exemption from getting a Social Security number for the reimbursement. So you don't need a Social Security number to participate. You do need a US address so that we can mail a check to someplace, but you don't need we don't collect a Social Security number. So we don't know if participants have a Social Security number or not. It's not required to participate.
Sarah, while we wait for other calls or other questions or comments, I do want to ask everyone who's listening to us, if you have a way to communicate to your own groups or other networks that we should reach out to, or if you want us to reach out to you with flyers or the opportunity to join another webinar, please let us know. You can communicate via our chat right now, or let Octavio know that you would like to join another webinar or get information from us, and we will be glad to pass that on.
We had another question come through. How many other similar clinical trials are currently taking place? I think related ones that are testing convalescent plasma.
Yeah, so there's a more local, not as national trial in New York that's testing convalescent plasma in patients that are in the hospital, just like ours. And then in the United States, there are 2 or maybe 3 that I know of studies that are testing convalescent plasma in patients before they're hospitalized, so in the outpatient setting, who aren't sick enough to be hospitalized yet. But there aren't a lot of these trials going on testing convalescent plasma in patients. We have funding from the NIH to do a big study, 1,000 patients, to try and answer this question. And the reason that we have this funding is to try and broadly expand our study across the whole US, really, which is why we have 20 sites. And so, you know, our trial is being run in a lot of different places, all kind of collaborative together. But as far as distinct other trials, there's only a couple others that are out there right now.
few other questions have come through. Are follow-up calls to participants conducted in the person's main language or in their preferred language?
The follow-up calls are conducted in the language that the consent form was signed in. So we have a bunch of different translated consent forms into many different languages. And the follow-up call is conducted in sort of that, or can be conducted in that language. So ultimately, it should be able to be conducted in whatever language the person who's taking the call feels is their best language.
Dr. Rice, I do want to mention that the informed consents were translated into more than 20 different languages.
Yep.
There's another question that's asking, are there any print, social media, or digital support at the local level?
So I'll take that question. We are doing social media at every market where a site is recruiting patients. So we have social media advertising, purchase in those areas. We will also have digital media advertising in some of the areas that need support recruiting donors and recruiting patients as well. We will not do print media at this time.
Great, thanks, Marcella.
We are receiving messages from some of you asking us to send you information. We will gladly do so. Just give us a couple of hours and we will email those to you. Thank you so much for that. I think we have time for a couple more questions.
Yep, we have a couple more that are coming through. So one question is this study just limited to 1,000 participants? And will it close when it hits 1,000?
Yeah, so we think it's limited to 1,000 participants. There's a committee called a Data Safety Monitoring Board that oversees, it's an independent group that looks at the trial results kind of as we go along. And they have the ability to stop the trial early if it looks like the plasma is hurting people, which we don't expect, but we always make sure that we have a way to stop if that's the case. They also have the ability to stop the trial early before 1,000 patients if it looks like the plasma is so beneficial that we should give it to everybody. And then at the end, they have the ability to say, this is really provocative, there's some interesting results, and we think you need to go longer to get the actual answer. And we could extend the trial beyond 1,000 patients. But the thought is that 1,000 patients is going to be enough to tell us the answer as to whether or not this is something that's beneficial to patients with COVID and that we should be doing as part of routine treatment, or that this isn't beneficial and we should focus our efforts elsewhere and not do this as a treatment. We think 1,000 patients is enough to answer that question.
There's another question about the age limit to participate.
Yeah, you essentially just need to be an adult. We have authorization from the Food and Drug Administration to use this as a treatment. That authorization says that, you know, we're not going to do it in kids, in children. So you have to be 18 years or older. There is no upper age limit for participation. So, you know, it doesn't matter if you're 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, you're eligible. There is no upper age limit. So.
We had a question going back to enrollment of 1,000 participants. The question is, how many of those 1,000 patients need to be Hispanic?
Need to be, I'm sorry, sir?
Hispanic.
We don't have a set number that have to be Hispanic. We would like as many as we possibly can to be representative of the populations that are getting COVID. And so we've done a lot of outreach to try and increase that number, but there's not a threshold that we're trying to, that we have to reach in order to meet a threshold for the population.
We've gotten a couple questions about if this recording will be available after we wrap up, and also if the slides will be available. And I just want to let everyone know that they will. We will plan to have this recording on our study website for folks to access.
Sarah, as far as the what proportion need to be Hispanic. The other side of that is that there's no upper limit for that either. So we won't ever have a time period where enrollment will be enclosed for Hispanics population or patients because we've already met our enrollment goal for them. It's an open enrollment, so as long as we're still enrolling patients, there will be opportunities for a Hispanic patient to be approached and enrolled.
Mhm. We have another question that just came through. Have there been any efforts for outreach to Latino organizations such as the farm workers, community clinics in poor neighborhoods where rates are high? Is it possible to go to them rather than have them come to you? So asking about outreach to community-based organizations.
Marcella, do you want to talk about that?
Absolutely, Dr. Rice. Yes, we are doing a lot of outreach. Actually, we just started the community outreach a couple of weeks ago. So today is actually our first webinar. We are reaching out to community organizations, nonprofit organizations in all the United States, but specifically in those areas in the markets where the sites are active. We definitely don't want to reach out into communities where there's not a site at least 30 to 40 mile radius close for people to participate. So as you visit the website, please, if you look at the participating sites, if you know of any organizations, if you're on the board of directors or have any contacts with organizations that you think we should reach out to in those specific markets, we would really appreciate that connection, that introduction. Always a relationship already established is better than a cold call or an email, a mass email. So we would appreciate that as well. Yes, I can send you my contact information. I'll put it on the chat, but you can also get it from Octavio. I will share it right now.
We still have a little bit of time left for additional questions. We want to put those in the chat box or in the Q&A section.
Octavio, are there any comments or questions that you have or any follow-up that you would like us to do at this point?
Yes, Marcela, thank you. No, I really appreciate the wide range of questions that are being asked by our attendees, all very relevant and important. On our part, I simply want to encourage those of us who are participating to definitely stay in touch and do let us know how we, through the Lideres Hispanos Association, can literally pass on this information to other individuals in your network and local community. Because again, I have found this session to be very informative, and I really appreciate Dr. Rice's detailed explanation of how this treatment works, and certainly look forward to seeing some positive results with this study.
Looks like we had one additional question come through. What are some of the barriers to access Hispanics for this study, and how can organizations such as this one, what can they do to mitigate those challenges?
Jasmine, Terry?
Yeah, I can take this one, and others feel free to join in. I think we know that racial minorities in general, specifically Hispanics, have experienced a lot of, medical mistrust, and rightfully so. And so I think that is a very key barrier that we are consistently thinking through, is how do we build trust within those communities? And that's kind of what we are doing with the recruitment materials, is just raising national awareness so that we are able to kind of foster those relationships prior to a patient being hospitalized.
The other key issue there is outreach like this. We know that in the Latino population, relationship is what really matters, is what counts. And so building trust, so through people who already have built-in trust, is the most important thing. That's why we really, encourage you to help us get the word out, share with other organizations. share the information with us so that we can reach out as well. But we understand as Latinos that it is all about relationships, and it doesn't take 1 week to build a relationship, it takes years. And that's why we're so thankful to Octavio and all of you for participating today. This is very important to us. Sarah, we have one more question in the chat.
Yeah, and actually I think another one just came through as well.
Okay.
So one question is having to do with the placebo. So what happens if the person given the placebo needs other medicine?
So we don't know if the person got the placebo or the plasma because we're blinded, but all the other treatments that a person could possibly get for COVID, the person can get regardless of which arm they're in. So you heard about remdesivir, you hear about steroids, you hear about some other treatments. All of those are available and options for a person who participates in this trial, regardless of which arm that they get. We ask that they try not to get plasma later on, because that makes it hard for us to understand the effect of plasma. But we recognize that sometimes that's not possible, and the doctors want to give plasma, and we just monitor that and record it, but it still can happen. So.
A few more questions. Someone asked if you had mentioned risks. Is a randomized trial the only way to assess effectiveness?
It's the best way for sure to assess effectiveness. And you may have heard that the Mayo Clinic led what's called an expanded access program early on in this disease, where they gave 70,000 patients convalescent plasma, but they didn't have a control arm. And a lot of us in the science community have looked at those results and have had a hard time understanding, is the plasma helping patients or not, because there's no comparison group that we can compare that to. And so that's why the trial is set up to have a comparison group. And it's the best way to understand whether the plasma is having a good effect. There's a comment about, it's kind of scary to be in the group that's the placebo group and we recognize that, and we're very grateful for our participants for participating. We know that we have this independent data safety monitoring board set up who's watching the trial, looking at the results, and will stop it if the results look so good that there's a clear benefit from the plasma. The other thing that we don't know is that there are reactions to plasma just beyond the blood reactions. Sometimes it can increase your immune response to a virus and make the immune response even more severe and worse. The only way to know if that's happening is also to have a comparator arm. So both of those things are being watched closely by the DSMB. And the goal is to get the answer as quickly as we can and put as few people into the trial that we can to get the answer, but to make sure that we get the answer.